I'm Stacy LeBaron, and this is another edition of Chelsea Hubcats. Today, Stephanie Harris of the Humane Society of the United States is joining us. We also have my partner in crime, Laura Appleton, who's part of the Chelsea Hubcats outreach team. So thank you so much, Laura, for joining us.
Yes, and Oliver is assisting.
And Oliver, yes, who's just very excited, is going to take a nap on the set, hopefully, for most of the show. And Oliver will be listening about community cats and all the community cats issues. And Oliver is quite used to living with cats, I assume.
Yes, many cats.
So we do have Oliver as a special guest today. Chelsea Hubcats is a nonprofit organization that was founded about 2 years ago to focus on the needs of cats within the city. We assist with free spay-neuter programs for cats and dogs, vaccination and microchipping clinics, and we do rescue for cats too. To date, we've assisted more than 1,200 cats and dogs in the city of Chelsea. For more information about our organization, you can go to www.hubcatschelsea.com and find out more about us there or on Facebook. Please consider joining the team to help make a difference for animals in Chelsea. Our phone number is 857-776-2287. And you can always email us at hubcatschelsea@gmail.com. So please don't be shy. Please reach out to us, ask for any help. And we'd love your help to help raise more money or volunteer to help the cats and dogs in the city. So thank you for that. So on today's show, we're going to focus on some local and some possible statewide conversations about legislation around animal welfare. And that's why we have our superstar legislator and advocate, Stephanie Harris. And we're going to specifically look at some of the local conversations that have been happening in some of our communities really quite close to Chelsea. And she has her finger on the pulse of all the different conversations in the area. So I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacy. I'm glad to be here.
So first off, maybe just share with our viewers a little bit about your background and how you got involved with HSUS. It's the Humane Society of the United States, but I am going to say HSUS because that's too much of a mouthful for me today.
It's a mouthful either way. I completely understand. So I studied political science in school. And studio art, so lots of overlapping classes. And after graduating, I worked briefly in project management, but pretty quickly decided that that wasn't for me. And so I actually started working in wildlife rehabilitation for a while. Okay. And I loved the experience. I've always cared deeply for animals. I always took a lot of bio and animal behavior classes in high school and college. And I really enjoyed my time working in wildlife rehab, but I realized that I really wanted to have an impact on more animals than those that just came through our doors. The work that rehabilitators and folks that provide hands-on care to animals do is invaluable, but I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit different. And so I found my way to the Humane Society of the United States. I started off as an intern in our wildlife policy department and moved around from there. I worked in our farm animal protection department for a while and worked to prohibit the cruel confinement of farm animals, of breeding pigs in gestation crates, of hens in battery cages, as well as to fight ag-gag legislation that would essentially keep what happens behind barn doors behind barn doors.
You said what, ag-gag?
Ag-gag, yeah, agriculture gag. It was it still is something that pops up all across the country as state legislation that would prevent animal advocates or anyone that's really interested in what's happening on farms from being able to investigate that. So it looks different in different states, but in a lot of cases it prohibits photographing or audio recording the happenings on agricultural facilities. So I did that for a little while, and then I started working on some of our wildlife-specific campaigns. I worked in Michigan on a campaign to help protect wolves. They had recently been federally delisted, and then immediately a trophy hunting season was opened up, so I worked on a campaign to try to prohibit that, which was thankfully successful. I then moved to Maine and worked on a campaign to protect bears there. It's the last state in the country that still allows the combination of all three, baiting, which is putting out piles of food to take an easy shot at a bear and bring home your trophy, trapping, body gripping traps, as well as the use of packs of dog to chase bears. And after that, I wound up in the position that I'm currently in, which is the Massachusetts State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. So I moved from Portland, Maine down to Boston, and now I work on our state level legislation, and I also assist on local efforts. So that's one of the things, as you mentioned, that we'll be chatting about today. And it's an incredible opportunity to work for an organization like the Humane Society of the United States. We're the nation's leading animal protection organization, and we really take on the big fights. We try to drive the most transformational change, and that means going up against some really big industries like industrial agriculture or puppy mills or the wildlife trade.
Well, and corporate businesses too. I mean,
Certainly.
you've done a lot of campaigns with regards to how restaurants are supplying or sourcing their foods and that kind of thing. So it's a huge range of topics there.
Yes.
So you have to become like an expert in a multiple realm. You know, you talk about wildlife, and you're talking about bears, which in Vermont I see a lot of bears. And then you've got listing animals and delisting them and the different behaviors there.
Yeah.
You know, in Chelsea, rats are a hot topic in Chelsea. I guess if we talk about animal conversation, we hear a lot about rats in Chelsea. We hear about cats, obviously, too, and we hear about dogs. And
I'm thinking maybe in the outskirts, coyotes, but I don't know more. But I'm curious. I thought maybe in the fall you were involved in the protection of deer in terms of hunting season.
So there have been, in the last several years, this might be what you're thinking of, efforts to open the Blue Hills to deer hunting.
Yeah.
So that was something that the Humane Society of the United States, MSPCA, and Animal Rescue League of Boston, we've been working on that for the last few years since it first was proposed. Unfortunately, the hunt continues, and they've only expanded the number of days and the methods that could be used in the Blue Hills. But certainly it's something that we want to see scientific evidence for the need for a hunt before they continue. And unfortunately, that's not something that we've gotten, but there is a state bill that's been filed that would require that they do some actual scientific research to figure out what's happening in the Blue Hills and whether a hunt could help or not, right? At this point, we just don't know that.
It's what I was remembering.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
one of the first times that I ever saw you was actually on TV. And you were melting. And it was a campaign, and I thought it was incredibly effective. We're getting towards the end of summer here, but there's still warm weather. And so you were doing a demonstration of what it's like being in a hot car. Is that the specific campaign, or was that just something that you were doing to really advocate this point?
So that was specifically in support of a state bill that we had been working on. The we in this case that put on that event was HSUS, but also MSPCA and Animal Rescue League of Boston. Our three organizations at the time were lobbying, campaigning, advocating in favor of a bill that would protect animals that are left in hot cars. It became a bigger bill, so it also limited the amount of time that a dog can spend on a tether and allowed our animal control officers and humane law enforcement officers to cite for certain cruel conditions for dogs. So it became a bigger bill, but that day we were focusing on the hot cars aspect, because this is something that we see all across the country, and we see here in Massachusetts, is that unfortunately there are animals, often dogs, that are left in hot cars, and it doesn't have to be very hot out for the temperature in a car to rise very quickly and to very unsafe levels. And so that particular day, I was in the car along with my colleague from the MSPCA, Laura.
And she was dressed. Wasn't she dressed up
She
in
was
something?
dressed up. I wasn't sure if I would disclose that, but yeah, she was. She was in a dog
dressed in
costume.
a dog costume.
She was in a dog costume.
Right, Oliver?
Yes.
And we had a big thermometer in the car with us that we put on the dashboard. And it actually, I mean, we did this, I think it was July of 2016, and it wasn't actually that hot a day compared to some of the scorchers that we have. It was a little bit overcast, and it was hot, but not boiling, which I think made the point all the better, because the temperature in that car in a very short period of time started to skyrocket. So we had a number of legislators that were sponsors of the bill come out and speak about the importance of this issue while we were sweltering in that car, and it had a real impact on people, being able to get that visual. We were parked right on the State House steps in front of the building on Beacon Hill, and the bill thankfully passed, and we had a wonderful bill signing with Governor Baker, and there was a tiny puppy gumdrop, which I'm sure some of your viewers will remember from being on the cover of a lot of papers as a result of that.
Do you think the bill would not have been as successful if you hadn't done that sort of educational demonstration?
I think it does make a difference. It's of course hard to predict how things will go, but I think that raising the awareness of the issue and the profile of the issue by having an event like that in the State House steps makes a difference, especially as we come up against the July 31st deadline for things to move at the State House.
So we're going to talk about some locations, local locations and stuff, but maybe I think we first maybe should talk a bit about the Humane Society's position with regards to community cats. I mean, what is your organization's real sort of thought process around that?
Yeah. Well, we have a ton of phenomenal resources on community cats, and since we're planning to speak about this at the local level in particular, I wanted to share with your viewers Managing Community Cats, a guide for municipal leaders, which is a phenomenal resource for communities that are interested in exploring this issue. And certainly, we want the best lives for cats. We want them to be safe, and we fully support TNR programs, trap, neuter, release. They're in the best interest of cats, they're in the best interest of wildlife, of communities, and the results, as I'm sure you guys are so well aware, are that they do make a difference in decreasing the cat population humanely, reducing conflicts with people, and reducing conflicts with wildlife.
So there are some people that might not feel that way. I'll just jump right to the main group, which are folks that feel that outdoor cats eat birds.
Yes.
And that seems to be a very hot topic. Maybe it's always been one, but it always seems hot. It never cools down. It seems like the bird folk and the cat folk. But I know a lot of bird and cat folk, people who like both, who are also very supportive of trap, neuter, return. But is that an issue that you have to deal with when you're talking with public officials about community cats?
Sometimes it is. It definitely depends on the community and how much wild lands there are, and if it is a conflict area for them. It's not always, thankfully. And one of the things that I focus on when folks ask about that is the fact that ultimately the people that are concerned for the welfare of these birds or other wildlife that they think the community cats are impacting, and the folks that are mostly focused on the cat perspective, ultimately we want the same thing, which is a lower level of population of cats that are living outdoors. So we have a similar goal in mind, so we can sort of set aside those differences and work toward that common goal.
I happen to have birdhouses and feeders in my backyard, and the cats watch and ignore them because they are not skilled in the hunt. So, my Coco had gone out the back door in the yard. She is in the yard, but she watches and she doesn't have the ability to grab the birds, and she watches. And so it's amusing relationship between birds and cats.
Absolutely, yeah. I live with a very good friend of mine, and he has a cat. So we have a cat, and we have a little porch, and so we enclosed it with chicken chicken wire, so we have a sort of catio
Ooh,
outside in our
good.
apartment. And Hadley, the cat, is constantly out there watching
Admiring
birds.
the birds.
Exactly, from a safe location. Safe for her, safe for the birds.
There have been some regulations out there about feeding community cats. You know, I guess you call them feeding bans or something like that. I don't necessarily think of them as being particularly successful in accomplishing sort of any goal. Is there a reason why these communities would want to have a feeding ban?
Well, one of the things that we advocate for is a feeding ban for wildlife specifically, because feeding wildlife puts people at risk and also wildlife at risk. Sometimes it's bad for the health of wildlife for them to be eating the foods that they often get from people, but also the close proximity to wildlife and the fact that they become accustomed to being near people puts them at greater risk and puts people at risk. So one of the things that we do recommend when we're talking to folks about using a feeding ban to help reduce conflicts with wildlife is an exception for community cats specifically, because that's something that we've always seen as very important, because the good work that people are doing, these often volunteers, but sometimes shelter or rescue staff that are doing the TNR work on the ground, I mean, they're doing the community a service, they're doing the wildlife a service as well, and we want to make sure to support that work by making a clear exemption in any bylaws or ordinances that are passed to ensure that they can continue to do that, to put out that food. Yeah, and we have some just incredible resources for wildlife. So I brought some of these, and you can find a lot of them online. If you go to wildneighbors.org, the Wild Neighbors program is a program of HSUS's, and it's very similar. It has similar content to this book, Wild Neighbors.
Oh, wow.
And basically this book breaks down by wildlife species, some basic historical information, biographical information, habitat information, but also what are the likely conflicts and how can you prevent them. It's a phenomenal resource. It has lots of different wildlife in here, some that are more relevant to us in New England than others. There's alligators and armadillo, but there's also...
We always want to know how to deal with those alligators going down down Broadway, right?
Yes, and armadillos.
Living near the Charles, it's a big concern of mine. But it also has beaver, black bear, bobcats, Canada geese, deer, coyote, fox, mice, rats, possums, you name it, it's in here. And if you go to wildneighbors.org, it has the same information. It's very, very helpful to residents, but also to community leaders.
And this book is available, or booklet is available from the web, or?
That's a good question. It might be on Amazon or from other sellers, but it's the content that the species-specific content is available on our website. It's for free.
John?
Yes, so it's written by John Hadidian,
Okay.
along with some other folks' input, and it's a truly incredible resource. But the info is all at wildneighbors.org, so folks can find it there. And we have specific resources for communities that are having conflicts, the Humane Wildlife Conflict Resolution Guide, and this delves in specifically on those points of conflict, as well as living with wild neighbors in urban and suburban communities. And so these are great tools for residents and community leaders that are trying to figure out what to do with wildlife. It's certainly a question that I have been getting more and more often with turkey populations moving into cities, coyotes living near urban areas. And how can we be respectful of the wildlife and set appropriate boundaries for them, make sure that they learn to be afraid of people, because for most of these species that makes a big difference. But I think we started talking about this from the feeding ban perspective, and that makes a huge difference for wildlife, is eliminating their access to food, intentional feeding or unintentional feeding. So if it's garbage cans that they're getting into, or you see that cute wild animal and you put out cracked corn intentionally, or even worse, you're going to the pond and feeding them bread, feeding Canada geese bread. So we can make a big difference by limiting the feeding that's happening for wildlife specifically and rodents, but making sure that there's a carve out for community cats.
You know, I'm in favor of coexistence, so, you know, not exclusive, you know. You are aware of the possum I grabbed it on Facebook, but it was on Fox News, and the mother possum had 4 or 5 babies.
The ones on her back?
Yes, in
Yeah.
East Boston. And I'm thinking, you know, it's everywhere, but you need to coexist.
Yeah.
So.
And opossums, they sometimes get a bad rap, but they are, I'm sure you guys have heard, they're tick hoovers.
Yes.
They eat
Yes.
so many ticks every day, hundreds
Yes.
of ticks, I
Yes.
think is what
Okay, so they
the latest
need to go up on
reports
the
are.
North Shore in Newburyport and
Yep.
go through Maudsley State Park, and they just
There you
put
go.
them all through there, because if you just drive through the parking lot, you'll come out with 8 ticks in Maudsley. I mean, that part of the state is full. I mean, everywhere in Massachusetts there's a lot of ticks, but
Yes.
living up near those marshes, my son had Lyme at 3 years of age, and it was just. It's tough up there too, and I'm sure that there's plenty of ticks down here too, and everybody needs to be careful.
Possums have redeeming qualities.
Well, and everyone does, and there's this interesting, ladder of life or whatever, where one animal eats another animal, which eats another animal, and if you take one out of that list, it just messes up the system too. So this whole ecological balance is at question, and I'm assuming that's a question that many Board of Health organizations have to consider when they're dealing with wildlife complaint issues. And correct me if I'm wrong, is it the Board of Health that usually addresses those issues, or is it someone else within the government?
Within a community,
Yeah.
it varies from community to community. It might be the Board of Health, it might be the Conservation Commission within a community,
Yeah.
or it could be the Board of Selectmen or City Council, depending on the type of community. So they all sometimes end up working together to address these issues. There are also some communities that have animal commissions specifically. Cambridge has one, Provincetown. There's a few others that have those set up specifically to advise on animal welfare.
So you were participatory in a meeting in Somerville, in the Somerville area, and so I just didn't know if you, since it's practically right next door, didn't know if you might just share a little bit about sort of an example, a case study of this is what a kind of a community goes through when they have conversations about community cats, wildlife, or a whole range of other issues. So I just thought it would be an interesting topic to discuss, not necessarily to say, oh, this is what you should do or you shouldn't do, but just to sort of have a report in on sort of what's been going on in Somerville.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So it came about because I get news alerts on different animal-related topics. So if there's animal as one of the keywords in a news article, it's going to land in my inbox at some point. And so I saw that there was some conversation already happening with the Board of Aldermen in Somerville about community cats. And so I said, oh, well, let's look into this and see what's going on there. If there's anything we can do to be helpful, provide information, share resources. And so I reached out, and it came, we discovered that the central conversation was actually about rodent control. And so there was an alderman who was interested in looking at out-of-the-box alternative solutions to help control the rodent population in Somerville, which wasn't the answer that I was expecting. So it meant I had to pivot a little bit, connect with some of our experts at headquarters about rodent control, and does this intersect with community cats? How does it intersect? Does it not? And so I was talking to our folks that work on wildlife issues and rodent issues, and our community cats experts. And there are some urban communities across the country, suburban, I should say, urban or suburban communities that have working cat programs. And so there are cats that are, that they're not community cats, so they're not cats that are sort of living in their own communities, but they're also not exactly adoptable. They're not candidates for adoption from a shelter or rescue. And so they ended up in these working cat programs. So sort of like a barn cat program, except in partnership with a specific business. So in some cases it was a brewery, for example, to help with rodent control there. And so that was something that we looked into. You know, is this successful for the cats? Is it successful in terms of rodent control? Is it remotely applicable in Somerville? What is the status of community cats in Somerville? And just doing a deep dive into all of these issues as a result of that Google News alert. And so
I'm aware of Chicago's
Treehouse.
Yes,
Yep,
yes.
their program, and they wrote a book about it
Yes,
too. It's very successful.
Yes.
And now there's another, what is it? Rescue Alliance DC in Washington,
DC,
DC.
yeah.
They've got a working, and I actually had just heard this weekend that they even have some cats like behind the Supreme Court, you know, and
hadn't
that
heard
kind
that
of thing.
location.
So, yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's cool. You know, it's one of those things where relocating cats is done very carefully and very
Right.
thoughtfully.
Right.
And you don't do it as a convenience. You don't say, oh, well, I'd rather not have these cats in my backyard. And so just throw them someplace else, because relocating cats is sometimes successful and sometimes
Right.
it's not. So you
Right.
have to be
and I think it's
very
overwhelmingly not successful.
thoughtful. It's, yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
retention rate after about a year is usually it's about 50%.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and the question is what happens to those cats? And I don't necessarily think that's been looked at very scientifically. On a, you know, we've all kept our records, and we go back and we call them up and we say, hey, how many cats do you have left?
Right.
But there's no GPS tracker there to
Yeah.
find where those other cats have gone.
Right.
So I think that is an interesting, you know, research project down the road, and probably will be done by somebody eventually when the resources can be found. But it's the rodent question. I mean, back in 1998, I got a phone call from the mayor of Newburyport because she'd heard about our barn relocation program, and she goes, you know, I hear you're relocating cats. And I said, well, yeah, we are, because there are some places where we can't put the cats back, so we are relocating them into barns. She goes, well, you're not taking them off the waterfront, are you? And I said, no, we're not. She goes, well, you better not, because we need them to help control the rat population. So the mayor, took the time to call me up to find out that, you know, we weren't removing at that point was the stable population of working cats on the waterfront. She wanted them there. And then after the cats died off, there was a lot of conversation about how to handle it afterwards. And there were a lot of people who were advocating for us to put more cats back on the waterfront, which we didn't, which in hindsight was probably a good idea, because we're in like this birder territory. And I think we might have had more conflicts with the birding folks if we had brought cats back down there. But you know, one never knows.
Right.
But there was
So-
definitely a population who were interested in doing that.
So were there rodents or rats specifically increasing?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they ended up using, you know, bait similar to what, you know, baiting them with poison and various other things. Yeah, so after the cats were gone, though, it was after the cats were well gone.
Right. Well, that's such an important point, because that was part of the conversation in Somerville was, you know, okay, we're looking at community cats, but what other options could there be? Pie in the sky, like what else can we consider? So one of the things that came up was raptors. And can raptors be used effectively for rodent control in targeted areas? And there's some efforts underway out in California that seem to show that it can help, but it's in much more rural environments than Somerville. And the city of Somerville still poisons rats. They still use rodenticide. And so it's really not something that should even be a topic of discussion until we stop using rodenticide, because we're just going to be secondarily poisoning the raptors if we try that route.
In addition, you know, maybe rats don't. I'm trying to say cats or other animals eat rat poison, and you know, you cannot tell.
Right. Yeah, rodenticide, it's a big problem for companion animals, for cats and dogs, but also for wildlife.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a huge problem that at some point really needs to be addressed. And there's all sorts of issues with the ways that we deal with rodents today. Glue traps are still used, and those cause serious problems for companion animals, again, for cats and dogs, but also for wildlife. We had a chipmunk come in when I worked in the wildlife rehabilitation facility that had been caught in a glue trap, and it's one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen. It's a tragic experience for any animal that's caught in it. And we don't need to use those methods. There are other alternatives. They're really comprehensive solutions to dealing with rats, and they take a lot of work. There's not an easy fix like putting down a glue trap or putting out some poison. It's more complex than that, and this book has lots of information about it. And feeding bans are probably first and foremost in that, in terms of making sure that food is not intentionally or unintentionally available to rats or wildlife, and that makes a big difference.
There is some progress in the study of baits that will, in essence, sterilize rats. And there are some now that are make a female rat only a quarter, 25% fertile versus 100% fertile. So, they still are able to have babies, but it'll be a little bit down, right? So I think the ACC&D, the organization that's looking for non-surgical sterilization for cats and dogs, and there's this Mickelson Prize, that's a $25 million prize for whoever discovers the magic shot or whatever it is.
The magic pill.
Yeah, exactly, magic pill. They, for some reason, probably due to demand, is they've gotten in the rat business, and they're looking at how to control the rat population through a sterilization method of some type.
Another option, of course, is if we were talking about balance and ecosystems and that sort of circle of life concept. And as we have more raptors that are moving into cities, which certainly we see, and as we have coyotes moving in, we have some of those natural predators back in our environments. But we need to learn to live with those wild animals that some folks are not used to living near. So it's an adjustment period, and certainly there's some groups that are doing a phenomenal job providing resources and education about how we adapt to living with these animals that we have forgotten how to live near.
Yeah. Is, in your experience, when you've dealt with various community cat ordinances that have been presented, to the community in general, or to HSUS, I mean, should communities have a community cat ordinance, or is no news good news?
That's a great question. It's actually not something that I have had come up in Massachusetts since I've been in this role.
Oh, because we don't
too often.
In Massachusetts, it's pretty much no.
It's
you just do your own thing.
Just a couple of times, and that's really it. But I know that's not the case for a lot of my colleagues. We have a state director in almost every state, and this is an issue that some states are dealing with in a community by community basis, and I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. I think in some communities, especially maybe communities where there are a lot of conflicts, maybe having some ordinance or bylaw that lays out a framework for some ground rules could be useful, but not in all cases. And when things are working well the way they're working, there are already groups that are doing TNR, and those cat populations are decreasing. They're doing it effectively. They're tracking their data, and there aren't conflicts. Probably not a need to
Don't shake up the
draft
pot.
an ordinance. And there's the alternative, of course, to having a bylaw or an ordinance, or an alternative, I should say, is passing a resolution. So that's another option, is you could pass a non-binding resolution that just says we support the idea of TNR, and maybe if anything, it helps raise the profile of the issue in the community, gets more community members interested and engaged in the issue, maybe more volunteers, at least more education and awareness for what the effort is and why it makes a difference, and support for the organizations that are doing it.
But I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, and aren't all of our community cats disease-ridden and filthy animals?
No.
I mean, Laura's their defender here, but there are people in the community who think of community cats as sort of these disease vectors. Are there any diseases we have to worry about with regards to community cats?
Well, you two probably know more about community cats than I do, so I'll say that right off the bat. But, thankfully, that's not a concern that I've heard much of in Massachusetts. Yeah. And we certainly are in a very different place from a lot of other states in terms of
like Indiana,
how we consider animal welfare issues.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's phenomenal that we're in such a different place, that I don't hear too many of those concerns. And I don't even hear of too many conflicts with community cats. I mean, they certainly
not
come
like,
up, but
the cats are in everybody's sandbox. Freudian slip there,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and there's certainly, there are conflicts, with regards to, like Navy bases, federal property for our armed services do not allow for trap, neuter, return, as far as I know. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I do believe that's the case. And I do, through my Community Cats podcast, I do have people reaching out to me from other parts of the country and saying, my hands are tied. I can't return any cats.
Right.
The Navy base, there was one woman I interviewed once, and she was not allowed to trap any cats, and they have feral cats on the Navy base. She's not able to trap, so she's hand catching them. And there's just no way she's keeping up from that perspective. So there's a lot of challenges, and I'm very much the optimist and think, there's a workaround. We can have a workaround on this. But sometimes I'm shaking my head, and
they don't bait traps, and then she catches them randomly.
Yeah.
No netting,
which is primarily, I think she's able to. I'm not sure about the netting, but she's doing a lot of barehanded catching, and it was
it's barbaric.
It's unfortunate, and so there are a lot of areas on a national level that, I think that we should work on. But from a local standpoint, I agree with you that Massachusetts, based on what I've learned about what's going on around the country, we are very progressive with regards to our community cats. Progressive in a funny way, because like the state values a cat at like $35 in terms of personal property value. So it doesn't value a cat at a high level, which in a way is good or bad, depending on how you want to go with it.
For example, my cat just passed, but you're attributing her worth as $35?
I'm not, but a lawyer would in court, yes, as what her value is. Now, there's your emotional attachment value, too. So you could, tack on whatever you wanted for that. But in terms
$1 million. Okay.
In terms of her physical worth, that's what my understanding is. And so and that goes into a whole nother show, which we could certainly have, about abandonment or lost and found cats. And, say I pick up a cat in my backyard and end up keeping it, and turns out it's somebody else's cat, and, you have a custody battle over that cat or whatever.
I'm curious. It's the state level or the federal level, but what is the value of a coyote? What is the value of a fox?
Well, and then there's the value of an endangered species.
Yes.
Versus, in terms of the levels of actions that you need to do in an area where, say, Vogue Park has piping plovers nesting in the middle of Vogue Park, and they're not able to fly, and the little baby chicks there and all that stuff. What sort of resources are you going to put in to try and protect that population where that's on the endangered species list versus, some pigeons there? You're going to be treating those two cases very differently.
Right, because this becomes a debate about the individual welfare versus population. And it's a discussion that has to be had for every species and in lots of different situations. You asked about the value of a coyote, and it's such an interesting thing to consider, because some people would probably attribute the value of like their hunting tag, like how much does it cost to hunt a specific animal. But the other way to look at it is a lot of these wild animals, they are a lot more valuable to us as a Commonwealth alive than they are whatever the cost of that hunting tag is for that specific individual animal. Because you think about the non-consumptive users of wildlife, people that are out in the woods that want to see wildlife, and those people get to see them time and time and time again. Lots of people get to see them, and so that's a lot of value to the state compared to one consumptive user getting to kill one animal. And that's an issue that comes up all the time at the State House, that our wildlife has a lot of value. I mean, people come to Massachusetts, they go out to the Berkshires to see wildlife, they go to the Cape to see marine wildlife. That's valuable to us as a state, and we shouldn't forget that economic piece of things when we're considering also the welfare angle.
And frequently hunting licenses and the hunt is for sport and not consumptive. They get no food value from it. It's trophy hunting.
Yeah, unfortunately. I just would like to ask folks to please make sure to stay to the end of the show, because we have a great little slideshow of a range of photos of some of the kitties that we've been able to help over the last several months. And most of them are from Chelsea, but all of them are also from some surrounding towns. So we are reaching out a little bit farther and being able to assist in other areas. Before we do a few announcements, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers today?
Well, I would love folks to get involved in our advocacy efforts at the local level and at the state level. And folks are welcome to reach out to me at massachusetts@humanesociety.org or visit our website, humanesociety.org/Massachusetts. So again, Massachusetts@humanesociety.org, or visit us online at humanesociety.org/Massachusetts.
And you have a Humane Lobby Day at some point, usually an annual event, right?
Yeah, so we often do lobby days. We've done it some different ways. Sometimes we do a big lobby day across a number of issues, so we'll have a handful of priority bills at the state level, and then sometimes we do an issue-specific lobby day. So recently we did one that was specific to the use of elephants in circuses and traveling shows, and another one on an animal cruelty bill. So yeah, folks can find that out on our website, or they can email me directly to get more involved.
2 quick questions. So circuses and pet shops, aren't those two, like Cambridge passed a bill, like no circus bill, right?
Yep.
Did they also do the no pet shop
Yeah,
bill too?
so there's about a dozen-ish communities, I think, in Massachusetts at this point that have passed local laws that prohibit the use of wild animals in circuses or traveling shows. And then there's a few communities that have prohibited the sale of puppies and kittens that come from commercial breeding facilities and pet stores. So that means that a pet store can either choose to go the pet supply route and have simply food and toys, etc., available, or they can make animals available in partnership with a shelter or rescue. And those are efforts that are happening all across the country at the local level.
That's great. That's great. So we've been busy. We've been plugging away through the summertime. Various announcements we have. I don't know, Laura, if you want to share anything. Summer's almost over at this point in time. So
No. It's flown by, I'm thinking, but
yeah. So we've been tabling, right?
yeah, we've participated in a few community events. Recently, the Art in the Park for the we sponsored a table at the community gardens, and we'll be looking for a science fest in August, maybe August 10th.
I think that's correct. Yeah. And we're actively looking for donations of auction items. We're hoping to have a 200 item auction in the fall. So if anybody has any gift certificates or any items or that they have made or want to contribute in any way to help donate to the auction, please, we will consider any item. Babysitting, dinner, homemade dinner. One year we had somebody donate like loaves of bread that they made and that kind of thing. So be creative, and definitely feel free to reach out to us at hubcatschelsea@gmail.com. And we can make that a really big auction. We definitely need the money, but we're able to help quite a few animals. And we have our microchipping and vaccination clinic is coming up on October 21st. Please check out the website, which will have details on that. We always need volunteers. Feel free to join us the second Tuesday of every month at the police department at 6:30. That's when we have our monthly meeting, check-in meeting with everybody, and it's good fun, busy, but good fun. Stephanie, you have any last thoughts? We really want to thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Any last words?
Thank you so much for having me, Stacey and Laura. It was such a great opportunity to be here to chat a little bit about the work we do at the local and state level. And I'm so glad you guys are interested. Thank you for the opportunity.
That's great. And Laura, as always, thank you so much for making this show happen. You started it off. You've kept us going, and it's a great partnership here. So thank you so much. And Oliver, you've just been the most dynamic little guest that we've had. He's been so well behaved. So definitely make sure we get good credits for him. We're going to have some nice photos at the end of the show. To donate to Hubcats Chelsea, if you'd like to really help make a difference, please go to hubcatschelsea.com. You can also find us on Facebook. Please join the team and help us. You can call us at 857-776-2287 or always email us at hubcatschelsea@gmail.com. And we'll thank you so much for joining us, for tuning in today, and we hope we'll see you next time. And please remember that there will be no cats or dogs left behind in Chelsea. Take care.